So as we talked about yesterday, that Paul said it's the right thing, the thing that will put you in right relationship and in harmony with God, is that you obey your parents as a child. And he goes on to say, it by example or further explanation, he said, honor your father and your mother. And in that, he's quoting the fourth commandment of the Ten Commandments. It's basically that we are to honor our mother and father. And then he goes on to say, which is the first commandment with a promise. And what is the promise? He says that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on earth. That's an ominous statement, if you will. But bottom line is that to honor someone is to attribute high status to them. In other words, it's the idea that if someone is honorable, it means that they hold a position that should be regarded as honorable. For example, when you go to a court, you are required to address the people in the courtroom by certain proper terms. There's the prosecutor, there's the defense attorney, there's also, and everybody's referred to as Mr. or Mrs., and also the judges, your honor. In other words, we're recognizing that that man who sits on that rostrum holds a position of authority that exceeds mine or anybody else in that room, and therefore we should show due respect to that position. We live in an age where the idea is that you question all authority and you don't honor anybody. It's kind of the misguided concept that they have an egalitarianism where everybody is equal. Well, there's no question in the eyes of God, all men are created equal, but we're not all created the same. And so we in order for society, for family, or anything to operate properly, there needs to be a recognition and honoring of those whom God has entrusted with responsibility in society. And so one of the things I find myself getting convicted all the time is that there are certain political personalities that hold positions of honor and I think behave in a highly dishonorable way. And sometimes I find myself crossing the proverbial line and just referring to them in a very derogatory way instead of really taking issue with their policies, their practice. You begin to enter into kind of ad hominem attacks where you begin to play names. I think one of the classic example, and I know a lot of people find it hilarious, but the whole idea of "Let's Go Brandon," and I don't want to go into long commentary on how that developed. If you don't know, that's good enough for you. But the realization that really when you say that, you're really implying something far more profane and derogatory, and I just don't think it's appropriate for you and I to go around saying those kind of things. And I haven't fallen into that trap yet, but I need to keep on reminding myself that sometimes when I get frustrated, I can't allow myself to go there and be that disrespectful. And that's the thing is I can have a lack of respect for policies and programs that really should not be being put forth and may be actually evil and wrong. But at the same time, we need to try to avoid attacking the individual as if they themselves therefore have no personal worth. They're of immeasurable worth in the eyes of God. And this is the whole idea of honoring, that I honor a person simply because God honors them and values their life. But that doesn't mean that I have to be accepting of their ideas, their policies, or their endeavors when I know that they are wrong or short-sighted or sometimes downright wicked and evil. I have no trouble calling those things wicked and evil because they are. Whether the person who's promoting them is that, well, God knows. I'll let him sort that out. But because they're going to reap the consequences for all eternity for those kind of decisions. But here again, he says to us, especially in our family relationships, we need to really have that sense of honoring of our parents because they are our parents. I mean, it's interesting how that people today find themselves excusing their own bad behavior or their own personal habits because their parents weren't good parents. And in one sense, you can argue that no parent is a good parent. Every parent has fallen short of the glory of God, and sometimes that we have fallen way short of the glory of God. And yet one of the things I came to recognize after I became a Christian is that although my parents had a lot of sinful behavior that was really part of their lifestyle, that God wanted me to honor my father and my mother because they were my mother and my father. And I looked at this statement. He said, do you want it to go well with your life? And essentially, by honoring my parents, I'm setting an example to my kids that they should honor me. And they in turn set that example for their kids, so their kids will honor them. And so what we have to understand is that, as they say in the military, a little more graphically, but poop flows downhill, sewage tends to go downhill. Hopefully it's going downhill in your life into the sewer or the septic tank. But the whole thing is that bad behavior tends to flow downhill as well. That if you are rude, disrespectful, and discourteous and mocking and critical of your parents, you have just given your kids permission that once they find something about you that they don't like or don't approve of, they have the same right to teach you with that same kind of disrespect. In fact, it's interesting that when Paul talks about the behavior of people during the end times, when the world is literally, if I can put it this way, going to hell in a handbasket, he says that one of the key things is they don't honor their parents. They're disrespectful towards their parents. Well, that's become the soup du jour of our culture today, isn't it? Where young people just speak about their parents in very disrespectful ways, and we have a kind of a Leninist, Marxist, neo-Marxist culture which really promotes that, because that's what Leninism and Marxism did. It promoted changing culture by destroying the family, and by destroying the family, suddenly the government becomes the new family figure and decides what's acceptable and unacceptable. So he says you need to understand that this behavior has a consequence, so that if you treat other people respectfully, they will in turn treat you respectfully, but so also the other people who are observing your behavior will treat you with respect. If you treat them with disrespect, you can expect that you'll be the victim of that as well. And so this is kind of we talk about the reciprocal process, that you give in order to receive back. And you receive back in proportion to what you give. And that's a biblical concept. And I think that we need to understand that where that is most important is that husbands loving their wives, wives respecting their husband. If you want your kids to love and to respect you, then you will treat your spouse with love and respect. It's really that simple. And they in turn will marry and do the same thing, hopefully, with their spouse, and their kids will do it to them. In the same way, if you honor your parents, your kids will see you honoring your parents. And if you dishonor them, they'll see you dishonoring. They'll feel permission to dishonor you as well when it suits their own sinful purposes. And so this is the way we can build or we can destroy. And it's interesting, he says, not only will it go well with you if you honor your parents, but you'll enjoy a long life. And I really believe that one of the things we see in the Old Testament is God calling for the termination of the life of those who were grossly disrespectful. It's interesting when you try to look at what's happening with the crime waves in the inner cities, and even the people who are occupying prison cells. Chuck Colson observed years ago in his ministry going into the prisons that most of the men were there who had no clear father image. It was a failure of the fathers to be in the home, and that's why the child grew up to be who he or she was. They found a strong, assertive male example, and usually it was a person who was engaged in the criminal world. That became their role model, and so their life ended up being shortened and being restricted by imprisonment. So, again, but we're going to keep on going on, because we're going to really talk again more, getting into verse 4, about the relationship of fathers to their kids in a very specific way. So look forward to continuing with you tomorrow.